Hello everybody, this is an overview of Chapter 3, which is Identifying Clear Learning Targets. At the outset of the chapter, the authors discuss the fact that our curriculum as a whole could be considered like a roadmap. It's also oftentimes our curriculum can be very complicated, and we have to break it down into learning targets that will serve as waypoints along the way towards our final assessments that we have. So our learning targets, which they describe as enabling targets, they help us reach our broader goals, which are our standards. So what is a learning target? It's a clear and concise statement of what students will learn, know, or be able to do at the end of a lesson. And they should describe the learning, not the activities. So if you see that you have a learning target, or you think it's a learning target, that tells what you are going to do as a teacher, or an activity that you're going to do, you need to step back and think, okay, what is the purpose of that activity? And then use that to develop your target. We're going to use the term learning target to talk about those lesson level targets. Sometimes you might see the words standards, objectives, and targets used interchangeably. But standards are those broader things that usually need to be broken down, and then our targets are, the specific things that we want our students to learn at a lesson level. So if we have clear learning targets and we're using them, then us teachers as well as our students will have a better understanding of what we're supposed to be learning, why it's important, and then we'll be able to use formative assessment more effectively to provide students with feedback and to guide our instruction as well. So it's super important to have good learning targets. So in this chapter, they describe the different categories of learning target, and they discuss why it's important for us to be able to distinguish those different categories. And one reason is because we're going to want to use different types of assessment techniques to assess those different kinds of learning. Also, it'll help, like if you have a standard that's really calling for reasoning, but all of your learning targets are knowledge, then that's a problem, and you're going to have to include some reasoning targets as well. So it's good to know these different varieties of targets. In the chapter, they're going to go into depth into all of the four here, not so much disposition, but knowledge, reasoning, skill, and product. They go into depth, they provide examples, so I'm not going to reiterate all of that, but just to say that it's important for us to use specific verbs when we're writing our targets. And I put a link here in these slides to a list of verbs that could help us, and we'll look at some other ones as well. But we want to try to stay away from really vague verbs like understand or know, and use more specific verbs that will, guide us and guide our students more clearly. One thing that I did want to point out is, the difference between knowledge and reasoning. We pretty much always have to have knowledge targets because they're going to be the foundation for all of the other ones, hence the graphic earlier in the earlier slide. But once we have those knowledge targets, then we can build on them. We can build on them to reasoning or skill or product. A difference between knowledge and reasoning is that with reasoning, we're going to be applying the knowledge that we have in a new context. So here is just an example of that, defining angles versus analyzing a shape and figuring out what angles are in the shape. Targets, the one thing I wanted to point out here, they discuss this on page 55, is that their use of the term skill is pretty narrow. and focuses on a demonstration of physical performance, verbal performance as in languages, things that we can directly observe and that we have to evaluate via observation. In everyday speech, we often use the word skill to talk about all kinds of things, but that's not how they're using it in this text. So be aware of that as you are writing your own learning targets. And then the last kind that they touch on are product targets, and these involve creating something new. And so in math, that could be like creating tables, graphs, and scatter plots. In PE, that could be like creating a wellness plan. Or in English language arts or social studies, that might be creating a research paper. So things where we're going to make something new, and the product is going to be what is going to be evaluated, those are product targets. It's important not to confuse an activity with a product target. Again, the targets have to focus on what do you want the students to learn, and activities are kind of what they're doing to get to that learning. And finally, disposition targets. They do not really touch on those in this chapter, but those would be targets that we might write to focus on attitudes or dispositions that we want our students to. So why do we need clear targets? Well, it helps us know what to teach, what to assess, what to plan for, and can just basically help us with supporting our students' learning. It also can help us collaborate with others, because once we break our curriculum down and write learning targets, then we can see how that relates to other grade levels or other subjects more easily. For the students, clear learning targets are very important because they help the student understand what the goal of the lesson is and what they're responsible for. And that way they're able to understand your feedback and act on it, and they're also able to engage in self-assessment better. And clear learning targets are also important for parents because, again, it's important to communicate to parents what we're teaching and what their students are learning. It helps them understand report cards, it helps them participate in conferences, and just be generally more engaged and informed about their child's educational experience. Okay, and so that's it. Just to sum up, we're going to be delving into this with your curriculum-based assessment assignment, and in that assignment, you're going to be taking a standard from this North Carolina Standard Course of Study, unpacking it, developing targets from that. So the next step for you is kind of looking over the Standard Course of Study in your area and choosing a standard that you want to work with. Okay, thanks a lot, y'all.